You've never built anything real for this family. You just write checks when it's convenient and disappear when it's not. Honestly, Derek does more for this family in 1 week than you've done in your entire life. My mother said this at her own birthday dinner, fork in hand, smiling at my brother like she'd just given him a compliment instead of stabbing me with the cutlery. My brother, Derek, didn't even look up. He just reached for the bread basket and nodded like she'd stated the weather. My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 29 years old. I'm a software engineer, and the house my family was currently sitting in, eating cake in, laughing in. I bought it. My stepfather Gary raised his glass. Derek's been carrying the weight of this household for years, he said. Real weight. Not just writing a check and calling it love. The table agreed. My aunt nodded. My cousin smiled politely the way people do when they want to stay out of it but secretly enjoy the show. I set my fork down quietly. I'd received a document that morning. I hadn't told anyone about it yet. My attorney had sent it at 7:14 a.m. with a subject line, confirmed. Ready when you are. I picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip and said, "You're right." My mother blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're right," I said again. I stood up, folded my napkin, and set it beside my plate like I was finishing a business meeting. Derek's been carrying so much. I hope that continues. I left before the candles were blown out. In my car, hands steady on the steering wheel, I pulled out my phone and typed 2 words to my attorney, tomorrow. Proceed. I didn't cry on the drive home. I didn't need to. I'd done my crying 2 weeks earlier, alone in my kitchen at 2 in the morning. When I first saw what Derek had done, that was when the calm had started. I didn't grow up expecting fairness. My parents divorced when I was 11, and my mother remarried Gary 18 months later with the kind of speed that tells you the overlap was longer than advertised. Derek was Gary's son from his first marriage. He came with a package loud, charming, allergic to consequences. My mother fell for Derek the way she fell for Gary, completely and without reservation. He could do no wrong. When he dropped out of community college, it was because the system wasn't built for creative minds. When he crashed his car twice in 1 year, it was because he's going through a lot. When he started a landscaping business that lasted 4 months, it was a learning experience. I was the learning experience nobody talked about. I got straight A's because the alternative was being invisible. I earned a scholarship because I knew there was no safety net under me. I got a job at 22 that paid better than anything Gary had ever earned, and from that point forward, I became useful in a way that had nothing to do with who I was. The first time my mother asked me for money, she framed it as a loan, $800 for a car repair. I transferred it that afternoon. She never mentioned it again, not even to say thank you, and certainly not to pay it back. That became the template. Over 6 years, I kept a spreadsheet. Not because I'm vindictive, I kept it because something in me knew I'd need it one day. Rent gaps, medical bills, Derek's investment opportunities. Gary's truck repair, a vacation to Myrtle Beach I'd been informed, was happening 2 days before they left and needed my contribution to $43,812. I stopped updating the spreadsheet after a while. The number had stopped surprising me. 3 years ago, my mother told me the house they were renting was being sold by the landlord and they needed to move. I was 26. I had savings and a good credit score and a real estate agent friend who owed me a favor. I bought a 3-bedroom house in a suburb 40 minutes outside the city. I put my name on the deed. I charged them below market, rent $600 a month, and I never raised it. Derek moved in 6 months later without asking me. He had a temporary situation. His room became permanent. The $600 became $500, then $400, then a conversation that trailed off every time I tried to have it. 2 years ago, Derek told me he was starting a new business. A cleaning company, commercial contracts, real growth potential this time. He needed a cosigner on a small business loan. My mother called it helping family get ahead. Gary sent me a text that said simply, "This would mean a lot." I signed. The business made it 11 months. Derek moved on. I was left on the loan. I made the payments. I didn't make a scene. That was my mistake, not because I should have made a scene, but because Derek read my silence as permission. 14 days before my mother's birthday dinner, I got a call from a mortgage company I'd never heard of. A representative asked me to confirm some details on a refinancing application. I told her she had the wrong person. She read me my social security number, my date of birth, the address of the house I owned. I sat down on my kitchen floor. Derek had filed a refinancing application on my house. He'd forged my signature on the initial paperwork. He'd listed himself as a co-owner with a backdated document I'd never seen and certainly never signed. The application was flagged by the lender's fraud department, which was why they were calling me. I spent the rest of that day on the phone. With the mortgage company. With the county recorder's office. With a real estate attorney named Patricia who had an efficient voice and no patience for wasted words. By the end of the week, Patricia had filed a fraud complaint with the county, placed a protective order on the deed, and begun building a case that would go before a judge. She told me to act normal. Attend any family events I'd already committed to. Don't tip Derek off. Don't confront anyone. Let the process work, she said. Your job is to not blow it up early. My mother's birthday dinner was already on my calendar. I went. I sat there and listened to my mother tell a table full of people that I didn't contribute anything real. I watched Derek refill his wine glass with the comfort of someone who has never, not once, faced a consequence that stuck. I said you're right, and I drove home and I texted Patricia. The next morning, a process server arrived at the house at 10:17 a.m. Derek was served with formal notice of the fraud complaint, the civil suit, and a court date. My mother called me 43 seconds later. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 8 minutes long. I listened to it once while making breakfast. She cried. She accused. She used phrases like, "You're destroying this family and Derek made a mistake. That's all. And why would you do this to us?" in that particular order that told me she already knew exactly what he'd done and had decided how much it mattered. I saved the voicemail. Patricia said I should keep everything. Gary texted me that afternoon. "This is not who we raised you to be." I set my phone face down on my desk and finished my workday. Derek called 17 times between noon and 8 p.m. I didn't answer. By the next morning, the calls had stopped. His attorney had probably told him to stop calling me. That silence was louder than everything else. I want to explain something about the week that followed, because it wasn't dramatic the way people expect these things to be. There was no screaming fight, no tearful confrontation, no moment where everyone gathered in a living room and finally said what they meant. The machinery just moved. Quietly, irreversibly, the way water moves under ice. Patricia filed additional documentation. The fraud case was referred to the district attorney's office. The civil suit moved forward on its own track. The protective deed order stayed in place, which meant Derek couldn't do anything else with the property while the case was pending. I also called my bank and began the process of transferring the mortgage into a trust under my name only, something Patricia had recommended to prevent any further complications. It took 3 appointments and a notarized letter, but it was done. My cousin texted me asking if I was okay. She was the only one. I told her I was fine and meant it in a way I hadn't meant anything in a long time. The first crack showed up in week 2. Derek called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered by accident. "You need to drop this," he said. His voice was different. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was smaller and more honest than anything he'd ever said to me. "I'm not dropping anything," I told him. "Do you understand what happens to me if this goes forward?" "Yes," I said. "I do." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "We're family." I had heard those 2 words weaponized so many times over so many years in so many different tones, pleading, demanding, manipulative, entitled, that they had lost all meaning. They were just sounds now. Arrangement of letters. "That didn't seem to matter when you forged my name," I said. He hung up. My mother stopped calling after the 3rd week. Instead, she sent a letter, handwritten, which I found more unnerving than the voicemails. She talked about sacrifice and disappointment and how I had chosen a path of cruelty over compassion. She did not mention the forgery once in 4 pages. I gave the letter to Patricia, who photographed it and added it to the file. Patricia called me the following Tuesday. Her efficient voice had a slight warmth in it that I'd learned to recognize as the closest she came to excitement. The district attorney's office had accepted the case. Derek would be formally charged with mortgage fraud and document forgery. I sat in my car in a parking garage and held the phone against my ear and felt the specific weight of 6 years leaving my body at once. What happens next? I asked. He enters a plea. He negotiates. Most likely outcome at this stage is a settlement and restitution, possibly probation given no prior record. He will not be able to do this again, he'll have a record. The civil suit for damages runs parallel. Okay, I said. Nora, Patricia said, using my name for the first time. You did everything right. I thanked her. I sat in the parking garage for another 10 minutes. Then I drove to a Thai restaurant I liked and ordered exactly what I wanted and ate alone and felt no sadness about it whatsoever. My stepfather Gary reached out 6 weeks after the process server's visit. He asked to meet at a coffee shop near their neighborhood. I went because Patricia said there was nothing legally problematic about it, and because I was curious what he decided to say. He looked tired. Older than I remembered, which was strange, because it had only been 6 weeks. Guilt does something to people's faces when they can't outrun it. He ordered a black coffee and wrapped both hands around the cup and said, "Your mother is not doing well." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was. Not for his benefit, but because I still had a functional heart. "Derek, it's complicated," he said. "It's not complicated," I said. He forged my signature on a refinancing application. "That's a crime." Gary looked at the table. "He's my son. And I am not," I said, not with cruelty, but with the kind of simple accuracy that ends arguments. Which is probably relevant to how all of this happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You could have talked to us first." I looked at him. I found out 14 days before the fraud department would have referred it to authorities automatically. I found out because a lender called me about an application I knew nothing about. There was nothing to talk about, Gary. There was only something to stop. He had no response for that. The coffee shop had quiet music and the particular mid-morning hum of people on laptops, and for a moment, it felt surreal to be sitting across from this man, who had lived in my house for 3 years paying below-market rent and was now looking at me like I'd done something unfair. "We're going to have to sell the house," he said finally. "If the court orders restitution that requires it." "Yes," I said, "that's a possibility." He blinked. "And you're okay with that?" "Gary," I said, "the house is mine. The decision about what happens to it will be made by a court based on what Derek did. That is not my doing." I finished my coffee. I paid for mine only. I drove to work. That afternoon, I put in a request with a real estate agent, not my friend this time, a professional I'd researched independently to begin looking for a 2-bedroom condo in the city. Just for me. A place where no one would be moving in 6 months later with a temporary situation. A place where the name on the door would match the name on the deed and no other paperwork would exist. She sent me 6 listings by end of day. I liked 3 of them. The legal process moved slower than I expected and faster than it felt. Derek entered a no-contest plea to the forgery charge 6 weeks before his scheduled trial date. His attorney had clearly advised him that going to trial would be worse. He was given 3 years of probation, a fine, mandatory financial fraud counseling, and a civil judgment that required him to pay restitution on the unauthorized loan application's processing costs and the legal fees I had incurred. He would be paying those fees for a long time. The family house went on the market 2 months after the settlement. My mother called me the night the listing went live. Her voice was different from the birthday dinner. The theatrics were gone. What was left sounded genuinely small. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked. "Mom," I said, "there are rentals everywhere. I'll even help you look if you want." She was quiet. "Then, you really don't care." "I care," I said. "I just cared differently than I used to. I used to care by absorbing everything so you wouldn't have to feel it. I'm not able to do that anymore." Another silence. Then, "Derek didn't mean to hurt you." I had known this moment was coming. I'd had months to think about how I would respond to it. In my head, I had drafted several versions, precise, devastating, emotionally complete. What actually came out was simpler. "Mom, he forged my signature on my property. Whether he meant to hurt me is separate from the fact that he did. I need you to understand the difference." She cried. I let her. I didn't fill the silence with comfort I didn't feel. Before she hung up, she said, "You used to be easier to talk to." I used to say yes to everything, I told her. I think you're confusing those two things. She didn't have an answer for that either. I moved into my condo on a Friday in October. My friend Becca helped me carry boxes. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived yet, and she made me laugh so hard I had to put my slice down. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like something stopped," I said. Like a sound I'd been hearing for so long I forgot it was there, and then it just stopped. Becca was the only person who knew the full version of what had happened. She'd been the one I'd called at 2 a.m., the night I found out about the forgery. She'd sat on the phone with me while I stared at the mortgage documents and felt the floor of everything I thought I understood tilt sideways. She hadn't said anything dramatic. She'd just said, "Okay, what do you need to do first?" and helped me think through it in order. That is what real support sounds like. I know that now with a specificity I didn't have before. The condo was on the 11th floor. The windows faced east. Every morning I woke up to light coming in at an angle that made the whole place look like it was made of something different, warmer, than the materials it actually was. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. I hadn't realized I'd stopped. Derek reached out once, about 4 months after the settlement. A text, late on a Sunday, that said, "I didn't think it would go that far. I thought you'd just fix it like you always did." I read it 3 times. There it was. The most honest thing he had ever said to me. Not an apology, not guilt. Just the architecture of what had happened, stated plainly by the person who built it. "I thought you'd just fix it." I had spent 6 years being the person who fixed things. Every leak, every shortfall, every failed venture, every gap between what this family wanted and what they'd actually built. I had been the margin of error for other people's choices. The backup account. The insurance policy no one ever intended to cash in because they assumed it would always be there. Derek hadn't forged my signature because he was reckless or cruel in any special way. He'd forged it because for 11 months, the word no from me had simply not been part of his mental model of how I worked. He had genuinely, honestly not anticipated that I would stop. That was more devastating than anything else about the whole thing. I didn't respond to his text. I blocked the number. Not with anger, I want to be precise about this, but with the same quiet finality with which you close a document you've finished editing. There was nothing left to add. My mother and Gary found a rental apartment in the same county. It was smaller than the house, which I imagine was an adjustment. I don't know the details. I made no effort to track them, and no one in the family offered updates. My aunt sent me a message in December that said she hoped the holidays would bring reconciliation. I thanked her for her good wishes and said I was doing well. That was the complete extent of my holiday communication with anyone from that table. I spent Christmas Eve with Becca's family. Her mother made too much food, and her dad fell asleep after dinner, and her youngest brother taught me a card game. I'd never heard of that. Apparently everyone in the world knows except me. I laughed a lot. I felt unremarkably, unceremoniously fine, which sounds small until you understand how many years I had spent performing fineness to cover something underneath that wasn't fine at all. January brought a work promotion that meant more money and more responsibility, and the specific satisfaction of being seen for something I had actually built. I celebrated by buying a really good bottle of wine and calling Becca and staying on the phone too long on a Wednesday. In February, I ran into Gary at a grocery store. He was in the cereal aisle. He saw me before I saw him, and by the time I registered the familiar silhouette, there was nowhere to go without making it strange. He looked older again. Or maybe just more accurately his age. "Nora," he said. "Gary," I said. We stood in the cereal aisle with the fluorescent lights humming, and neither of us was sure what to do at the moment. He said, "Your mother asks about you." "I know," I said. "She has my number." He nodded slowly. "We're adjusting," he said, meaning the apartment, meaning the new version of things. "Good," I said, and meant it in the specific way that has nothing to do with satisfaction and everything to do with relief. Relief that they were not in crisis. Relief that they were managing. Relief that I was not being asked to manage it for them. He started to say something else. I watched him form the beginning of a sentence about family and time and how these things have a way of sorting themselves out. And I waited to feel something shift in me, some old instinct to nod and absorb and make the moment easier. It didn't come. "Take care of yourself, Gary," I said. I put a box of oatmeal in my cart and kept walking. The produce section was bright and uncomplicated. I picked out apples and thought about nothing in particular except what I wanted to make for dinner, which turned out to be roasted chicken and whatever vegetables looked best, which was a perfectly adequate thing to think about on a Tuesday in February. On the walk back to my car, I thought about the spreadsheet. $43,000 plus. The house purchase. The loan cosign. The years of financial buffering that had accumulated so gradually I hadn't seen their full shape until I stopped contributing to it. I wasn't angry about the money. I want to say that clearly, not because I'm performing a magnanimity I don't feel, but because it was genuinely true. The money was gone, and I had made more since, and I would make more still. What I had spent was not primarily money. What I had spent was the assumption that giving was relationship, that proximity was love, that being useful was the same as being valued. Those assumptions were expensive, much more expensive than any check I'd written. I had bought them back for myself. That spring I did something I had been putting off for longer than I could justify. I booked a trip. 2 weeks in Portugal, alone, with no particular agenda beyond a list of bookmarked restaurants and a vague intention to sit somewhere pretty and read books I'd been meaning to read for 3 years. Becca called me dramatic for going alone. I told her I'd send pictures. She made me promise not to fall in love with a stranger and stay there permanently. I didn't promise. The morning I left, I stood at my window with coffee and watched the city come to light in the slow, particular way it does at 6 a.m., when most of it is still asleep. The east-facing windows did their thing with the angle and the warmth, and I thought about something Patricia had said during our last call. After the settlement was finalized and there was nothing left to file, she'd asked me how I was feeling. I'd said something about relief, and she'd paused for a moment and then said, "You know, most people in these cases spend the whole process waiting for it to feel justified. Like they need permission to protect themselves. You never seem to need that." I hadn't thought of myself that way. I'd spent most of the process feeling like I was simply responding to facts, documents, signatures, phone calls, court dates. One thing following from the previous thing in logical order. But standing at the window with my coffee, I thought maybe she was right in a way I hadn't fully processed. I had never needed permission. I had only needed clarity. And clarity had come the night I found out what Derek had done. Not with fury, but with that particular cold stillness that means something has finally resolved. They had spent years building a version of me that existed to absorb their needs. Quiet, capable, always available, never requiring anything in return. That version of me had been genuinely useful to them. It had also been genuinely expensive to me, in ways I couldn't have itemized but could absolutely feel. When Derek forged my name, he wasn't trying to destroy me. He was operating within the logic of the version of me he'd been given. The version that fixed things. The version that ultimately said yes. He just hadn't gotten the update. I finished my coffee. I checked my bag one more time. I locked my door, my name on the lease, my name on the deed of the building, my name the only name on anything that mattered in my life. I was not the family's emergency fund. I was not the quiet solution. I was not expensive, and I was not useless, and I was not what anyone at that birthday dinner had decided I was, while they ate food at my expense in a house I owned, while I sat there and took it with the patience of someone who had already decided it was the last time. I took the elevator down. I walked through the lobby. I got in the car. I drove to the airport, and I did not look back, not from habit, not from indifference, but from the specific freedom of someone who has closed a chapter so completely that turning back to check it would simply be a waste of time. The flight left on schedule. I watched the city shrink below me through the window, all those independent lights becoming a pattern and then a glow and then nothing, and I thought, this is what it feels like to stand on your own. It turns out it feels like nothing dramatic. It feels like Tuesday. It feels like coffee at the right temperature and a window that faces the right direction, and the understanding that the life you protect is the one you actually get to live. I put in my headphones. I ordered a sparkling water. I was fine. I had been building toward fine for a very long time, and I was finally fully there.